You can hear me? So I'm going to make a very brief presentation, 5 minutes maximum, about President Walesa, his biography, his achievements. Sometimes we think we know about a topic and we're always surprised in the end. There's more complexity and a lot of things that Cuba can definitely learn. So El Rostro de la Libertad, President Walesa. Ever since the incredibly brutal invasion of Poland by the Soviet Union and Adolf Hitler, the Poles have been fighting for their freedom to regain their independence. For a long time, this Committee for the Defense of the Workers, or KOR, was the leader in the 60s, the 70s. We see them here gathered with the Czechoslovak dissidents as well of Charter 77, illegally in the mountains in the border between Poland and Czechoslovakia. You remember Zbigniew Romaszewski, for example. He came here to Miami to help us with his wife, Sofia, give us a lot of advice about transitions. There was an especially brutal repression in 1970 where several workers died. The regime killed them, and then, there was this huge monument in Gdańsk to their honor. But later, guess who got elected as the Pope of all the Catholics, the first time a Slavic Pope in history, the Cardinal of Krakow, Karol Wojtyła, and his pilgrimage. His pilgrimages to his native Poland had one message: do not be afraid. And some people that were there, on the hundreds of thousands greeting him, say that fear evaporated when they heard a Polish Pope saying that on Polish land. Lech Walesa, an electrician with all these children, had been fired by the Gdańsk shipyard where he worked, the Lenin shipyard, for trying to organize a workers' committee in there, already doing activism. And he didn't know how he was going to pay all those bills with, him being fired. But then suddenly, there was a spontaneous strike in that same shipyard to defend the rights of a woman named Anna Valentinovich, who had been denied her pension. Lech Walesa famously jumped the gate to join and lead that protest in the Gdańsk shipyard, the Lenin shipyard. Which led to a huge wave of strikes around the whole northern coast of Poland in solidarity with the ship workers' strike. And that's how the labor union, Solidarność, Solidarity, was born. The communists had imported very expensive equipment for those factories, and these workers had that equipment essentially as hostage in exchange for what? To legalize Solidarność. So that's when the communists had no choice but to sign an agreement called the Gdańsk Agreement in August of 1980. And we see to President Walensa's left this communist, the head of the Communist Party of Gdańsk, Fischbach, who, interestingly enough, was a moderate and never opposed and kind of facilitated those Gdańsk agreements, curiously. Sometimes you do find people like that in the regime. And President Walesa signed those agreements with a pen that looks exactly like this, and you see the image of Pope John Paul II on this pen. I so badly wanted to be there to sign those agreements as well. And this is Fischbach, by the way. I've been to so many of these, birthday celebrations, anniversaries, and he attends them and speaks very proudly of his role in helping Lech Walesa legalize Solidarność. This is the workers carrying Walesa outside where the agreement was signed, and you see one of the people there. That's the future Prime Minister of Poland, Tadeusz Mazowiecki. And that's his wife, Danuta, a hero also of this struggle. Solidarity, in no time, had 10 million members. In a country of 40 million, 1 out of every 4 Poles was a member of the Solidarity trade union. Things, of course, were getting very difficult for the regime. There's speculation how much Brezhnev's Moscow, pressured Wojtek Jaruzelski, the general, to take over power, ban Solidarity, and arrest the entire leadership, including Lech Walesa. Several workers attempted to resist this. There was a famous case in Wujek where many died. These are the tanks in the streets of Poland during martial law, but Lech Walesa never stopped fighting. Time magazine declared him Person of the Year. Even here in Latin America, you see one of our great friends of the Cuban cause, Luis Alberto Monge of Costa Rica, rest in peace, who later became president, Libertad para Walesa. In Mexico, even our press was going crazy over this. Here's Impacto, one of the few independent magazines of the time. You know, even my father wrote an open letter where he said, in 1988, interestingly, and he said, Walesa ha descubierto que una dictadura del proletariado sin el proletariado no es más que una dictadura a secas. These are his baby daughters wondering when daddy was going to come home from prison. Adam, which one is your wife? There we go. She doesn't look like that anymore, but his children do. So they released Lech Walesa from prison. Here he is kissing his wife, Danuta. And the Pope kept encouraging Walesa to continue. There was a famous meeting where the Pope was giving him advice. Then the Nobel Committee in Norway gave him the Nobel Peace Prize, but he did not want to leave Poland. He sent his wife Danuta to pick it up because he was afraid they wouldn't let him back. The workers kept striking, they kept doing things until one fine day in late 80s, they got a phone call, and here's the dictator Jaruzelski sitting down with Lech Walesa. What happened was that suddenly they wanted to do free elections. They negotiated a famous round table. We see here some very interesting characters. That's the head of the secret police, Kishak. That's Alexander Kwasniewski, the head of youth and sports of the communist regime. But you see over there on the other side, we have Wałęsa, we have Mazowiecki, and Adam Michnik is the one that's drinking the vodka, because they celebrated this round table of transition of how to organize these elections where about half of the seats in the parliament were up for grabs. And nobody expected that Solidarity would take essentially all of them. They swept away the communists in all the seats that had been contested. And one of the great things about Poland is that they're very pro-American, unlike some of their neighbors. And so they would use American figures and American motifs in that election. Everybody was seeking Wałęsa's endorsement. Others came to help in the campaign. Ronald Reagan, Bush, Margaret Thatcher. And then when Solidarity formed the first non-communist government of the Eastern Bloc, Gorbachev received the winner in the Kremlin as if he was the head of any normal sovereign European nation. That's Tadeusz Mazowiecki, as he did with Václav Havel a little bit later, by the way. Lech Walesa was one of only 3 private citizens to ever address a joint session of the United States Congress, where he started with the words, "My narod," we the people, to thunderous applause. Here he's meeting Václav Havel for the first time, by then President Havel of Czechoslovakia. By then the economic reforms had started in Poland, and so the stores were finally full of sausages and other things. President Wałęsa, it was a year and a half later after this liberation when he became president of Poland, the first freely elected president of Poland. That's when, well, the Soviet Union and Russia finally withdrew their last tanks and weapons and during his presidency. Two massive hit rock videos from the 80s. Well, one of them, 90, A Wind of Change by the Scorpions, in fact, features Lech Walesa during the hopeful years. Here's Gorbachev meeting the Pope in that same video. Then President Walesa traveled the world helping other democratic forces. Here he is in Mexico. The first act of President Vicente Fox after his inauguration was to inaugurate a Solidarność exhibit in Mexico City. And he's been fighting the government of Poland, which has been restricting certain rights, which is ironic because that government comes from Solidarity, from previous allies. But he and the architect of the Polish economic reforms that quadrupled Poland's GDP, Lech Balcerowicz, published a book together because one represents liberation, the other represents the economic reforms. It's called Wygrać Wolność, or To Win Freedom. Here he is meeting with some familiar faces to you. You see, back in 2014, I believe it was, when a group of Cuban dissidents, Cuban activists, went to visit him in Warsaw, and even participated in that same round table. The Poles keep that famous round table from the Magdalenka Accords, and here's Dagoberto, here's Antunes, sitting exactly where those In one of the big anniversaries, well, this one in Prague of the Velvet Revolution, we organized a small, what's called a happening. It's very traditional in Eastern Europe and Central Europe. And we have the heroes, we call it the Thank You Campaign. And we have the villains. Boo. And even made the press worldwide, our little happening. We bought billboards to thank the great heroes of liberation. Then in one of the big anniversaries, which was right before the pandemic in 2019, all over the world, we took President Walesa, this is in Washington, in the monument of the victims of communism, to lay a wreath like he did today in La Casa del Preso. Here we are at Harvard University, where President Walesa gave a speech. You recognize John Suarez. That was a testimony before the U.S. Congress, just like he did in 89. This is 2019, the 30th anniversary of the Annus Mirabilis of the Liberation of Nations, 89. Vice President Pence received us at the White House. At Harvard, never a lack of fans and standing room only. Then, believe it or not, we Sovietologists have a convention, and he spoke at my panel about 89 and the meaning of that. Then we took him to see Mikhail Gorbachev in Moscow, and look how incredible. I mean, despite the fact that these two nations have been, well, enemies for a very long time, and there's very complex relations between them even today, look how warmly they greet each other when Walesa went to Moscow to visit Gorbachev at his office, as you see here. And guess who those are around them? That's the Scorpions. That's the same Klaus Meine, and he impromptu stood up to sing Wind of Change to these great heroes. It was the last time we saw Gorbachev alive. Anyway, thank you, President Walesa.